Nintendo consoles, a necessity for gracious living. For nearly 40 years now, Nintendo has been a dominant force within the world of console gaming, successfully putting out new hardware every generation. This boom period for the company started with the Famicom back in Japan in 1983, but as popular as this machine was, the Big N was aware that it would have a shelf life right from the beginning. A sequel to the Japanese equivalent of the NES would first be mentioned by Nintendo even as far back as 1987. With it not being too long after that, pictures would begin to surface of the Famicom's planned replacement. So join me today as we look back in depth at this mysterious transitional period to the days when the Super Nintendo instead looked like this, functioning as a sort of missing link between the Famicom and Super successor. I am Lady Decade, and this is the story of the mysterious Super Nintendo from 1988. The year is 1987, and Nintendo's dominance over the Japanese gaming market is very much a thing. But despite their successes, the looming threat of the more powerful PC Engine seems to be enough to be stopping Nintendo from getting complacent. 1 month before the release of the PC Engine in October of that year, the then Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi would reveal to the Japanese press that a newer Super Famicom was indeed on its way. Keeping the release of the PC Engine in mind though, many speculated at the time that Yamauchi was merely saber-rattling and there was no new Nintendo console in the works yet, with the president simply making a statement to try and put off consumers from investing in a PC Engine. Not only that, but allegedly, Enix was waiting on the results of the PC Engine's Christmas sales figures before deciding whether to make Dragon Quest games for the hardware or not. So Nintendo felt that NEC's failing would be highly beneficial to them. Past this point, things would go very quiet for a while, adding gravitas to the theory that a 16-bit Nintendo console wasn't close to coming out. Finally, more news would be revealed on the 30th of August 1988, 11 months after Yamauchi had mentioned it. In an interview with Touch magazine, the development would be announced for 3 games. These included Super Mario Bros. 4, which would later become Super Mario World, and Dragon Quest V, meaning Nintendo may have gotten exactly what they wanted from the previous year's announcement. The cheeky buggers. Strategically, it is also interesting to note that this latest announcement occurred less than 2 months before the release of the Sega Mega Drive. This console would later cause Nintendo more problems than any previous system. So again, it made sense to remind consumers that they were working on the Super Famicom to deter them from investing in the latest Sega hardware. A few short weeks into the Sega Mega Drive's lifespan, things began to get really interesting, as on the 21st of November 1988, a Super Famicom unit would be demonstrated to the press. The Super Famicom was real, even if the playable model looked very different to the retail release, which would not happen for another 2 years yet. Famicom Tsushin magazine would publish images of this very early Super Famicom unit as part of a special report with the fine pages of their 23rd of December 1988 issue. ChrisMCovell.com would awesomely upload shots of this publication, helping to show off the early Super Famicom in all its prototype glory. The magazine and retrospective website reports that the system was revealed to a crowd of over 200 press members, with the system's capabilities compared to the PC Engine and Mega Drive. The article also outlines that the Super Famicom was planned to be released 7 months after this press event. However, we now know that this prediction was over-ambitious. Since new generations of hardware may not have been something that all gamers were yet familiar with at the time, clarification would be given that the Super Famicom is entirely incompatible with that of the older Famicom, with the new system instead featuring its own games. Speaking of the Famicom, this brings us to another mysterious prototype. The prototype of the Super Famicom was not the only system shown off at this press event. Still, a revised model of the original Famicom resembling the prototype Super Famicom was also shown off. The purpose of the redesign was because this revised Famicom, like the Super Famicom itself, was announced to feature an AV output on the back, allowing it to output AV gameplay. The AV Famicom would later be completely redesigned and sold in a new shell as the new Famicom, which would also be released stateside as the NES-2. One additional change that was to come between the AV Famicom prototype and the later NES-2 would be the controllers. The prototype model utilised prototype Super Famicom controllers, whereas the retail release would come with a 2-button controller in the shape of the final Super Famicom's pads. Speaking of the prototype controllers, which are the same for both pieces of hardware, close-ups reveal that back then the 4 buttons on the right were all red. Instead of being labelled A, B, X and Y, back then they were labelled A, B, C and D. In fact, the left and right shoulder buttons that would come to be known as the L and R buttons were different too, back then being referred to as the E and F buttons. 1988 was wild. As you can see, the prototype designs of both of these products vary significantly from what would eventually hit the market, with colour schemes being different, the button layouts atop the consoles being in other places, and even the controller ports being a different shape. Tsushin magazine would also publish reactions to this newly shown off hardware from various software companies, with the majority appearing very impressed. A Data East representative would comment, "It looks like a good machine. I want to try out Mario 4 and Zelda 3 as soon as possible." A Square employee would add, "I am beyond anticipation. The forecast of 3 million sets sold per year does not seem like a dream. I absolutely want to make something for it." ASCII would state, "It is the next generation home video game machine. We'll think hard about how to make use of a 4-button joystick." So weird in retrospect that developers had to think of ways to utilise 4 buttons on a controller. Makes you wonder what they would think of a PS5 controller. As for other bizarre artefacts of the past that have been immortalised and preserved through this magazine, one page that goes into detail about the Super Famicom's graphics, colours and resolution capabilities shows off a fascinating game screenshot. A picture of what appears to be gameplay of a 16-bit version of Zelda 2 Adventure of Link. Mind blown. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to be anything more than a single-screen mock-up shown during a tech demo showcase. Still, it didn't stop the image from baffling the internet when it surfaced online previously without any additional context given. Other pages show off the Super Famicom's exceptional scaling and rotation abilities and recap what is known about the hardware's graphical power. Sound capabilities are covered, and the types of games that will be developed for the hardware are heavily speculated upon. Famicom Hisubon magazine would also report on the Super Famicom press event, covering much of the same information as the other magazine. It does add though that Nintendo was considering a trade-in program. This would allow long-time Nintendo customers to trade in their old Nintendo hardware, an idea that obviously never materialised into anything solid. It certainly would have been convenient for those looking to quickly get rid of their last generation hardware. A shot of the side of the prototype Super Famicom is also shown off, revealing a headphone jack and accompanying volume control. This feature would be dropped from the final release completely. Analysing the system specs, Hisubon magazine would also rather hilariously describe the Super Famicom's capabilities as looking like they were being handed over by visitors from the 21st century. Little did they know how technologically far along we would be by that point. Regarding these so-called 21st century features, translated on Chris Covell's website, the article would state as follows. Although it displays a maximum of 256 colours, you can select from over 30,000 colours, so even subtle skin tones can be expressed beautifully. You can also scale up, scale down and even rotate the arcade games that have recently become popular, such as Assault. The scrolling function is also enhanced, such as partial scrolling. There are 4 independent scroll planes. In addition, the sprites function, which can be called the life of a real-time game, can define 64 times the size of the current Famicom in one shot. And it is also handy for displaying big characters. The number of characters that can be arranged horizontally has also increased, and up to 16 Dragon Quest characters can be calculated without flickering. The resolution of the graphics screen, which is more important than colours, can be finely reduced to 512 dots by 448 dots, which can be said to be the limit of home televisions. The future is now, old man! Unfortunately for the people of Japan, back in 1988, the future wasn't quite here yet, because, as stated earlier, they would have to wait another 2 years before the Super Famicom would finally be launched. Released on the 21st of November 1990 for 25,000 yen, the Super Famicom released to the public varied greatly in aesthetics from what gamers had seen a couple of years earlier. All the hype and anticipation would cause so much hysteria that launch day would result in social disturbance, leading to the Japanese government asking that video game console manufacturers schedule their launches on weekends. The Super Nintendo would be the most popular game console of the generation once again, with the system now considered iconic today and one of the most beloved Nintendo systems ever. Whether it be the original retail model that Japan and the rest of the world received, or the blocky redesign made for the United States, the Super Nintendo is instantly recognisable, conjuring up nostalgic memories of extraordinary moments gone by. However, before either of these designs existed, this grey and red beast had successfully wooed the Japanese press and gaming public, so therefore I feel it's essential to acknowledge this mostly forgotten early chapter in Super Nintendo history today. If you enjoyed learning about the mysterious Super Nintendo from 1988, I would imagine it would spark joy in your heart to check out my upload on what Super Mario World looked like back in 1989. Peace.